Hi, I'm Sam from the Danger Planet, and I'm joined today by Jesse from Boring Conversation. And today we're going to be talking about the Explorer Society.
We sure will. They're definitely one of my favorite factions in the game.
Yep, the Society is the first brand new faction introduced in 3rd edition, and it's a really cool mixture of different types of models. See, the Society is mostly rich Earthside individuals who decided to come over and make Malifaux their personal playground. So they pillage tombs, loot relics, explore the wild places, and hunt people for sport.
Yeah, definitely. One of the really cool things about the Explorer Society is that there were actually a number of new mechanics that were introduced to the game with the release of the faction, and that really went a long way towards shaking up the game.
It really did. And at first, it was shaking it up in an, oh my god, why are they killing everyone? How can we make them stop way? But after Weird applied a balance update, we actually did a video about that. You can find a link in the description. Explorer Society has been brought back to Earth a little bit, and I think they're a lot more fun both to play and to play against.
Yeah, definitely.
And they still have plenty of tricks. So where are we going to start?
Let's start with Anya Lycarayen.
Anya Lycarayen. So Anya is the very young CEO of Condor Rails, the biggest rail monopoly in Malifaux. And naturally, that makes her incredibly wealthy and powerful because everything in Malifaux needs to travel by train. So Condor Rails has a real hammerlock on building those train routes out in the frontier, which naturally means she needs to get some pretty tough enforcers to help keep her train safe and lay track. And that's her keyword, the Syndicate.
Yeah, so the Syndicate have some pretty cool keyword abilities, the most unique of them being Price of Progress. That actually allows any model with that front of card ability to take a damage and then add any suit of their choice to the duel total, which gives her an entire keyword of models that can get any suit they want anytime they need it. And that is pretty powerful.
It really is. But remember, you need to take the damage and declare the suit before you flip.
Yes.
It's like spending a soul stone. It's still very, very strong, especially since her models have lots of really powerful triggers.
Yep. And another really cool thing about Anya is that she is one of only, I believe, 2 models in the game with the hostile work environment ability on the front of card, making it so that enemy models cannot target other models friendly to them within 6 inches of Anya. And that can really mess up your opponent's game plan.
Yeah, there are some crews that just straight up don't function if they can't target each other. So Anya's original form is very much a melee brawler. She has Blade Rush, which lets her charge right through enemy models and deal damage to them. And she has a very powerful Ancestral Tomahawk that attacks at a stat 7 and has 4 powerful triggers. And again, remember, she can build in those triggers. And one of those triggers even heals her off from the damage that she spent. Right. So there's really no incentive ever to not do it. Beyond that, she also has some really interesting play with hazardous terrain. Whenever she drops a scheme marker, the area nearby that scheme marker is hazardous. And she has a bonus action that lets her drop a scheme marker within 6 inches of herself and then teleport to it, which really helps her get across the board. And of course, she has a few other abilities to push models around so that once they're in that hazardous aura, they start taking ping damage.
Yeah, one of the coolest abilities on her card is one called Union Buster, where you simply choose a target within 6 inches of her and a direction either toward or away, and you just push all models within 2 inches of that target, 2 inches in the chosen direction. There is no resist.
Although I will say, for the record here, Union Busting is not cool.
Not cool.
Anyways, Anya's title is pretty interesting. Her title, Rail Magnet, has had her step back a little bit from the battlefield. So she's no longer out there chopping things up with her tomahawk. She's instead chopping things up in the boardroom with a labor contract. What that means is whenever any model in her keyword drops a scheme marker for any reason, so interacting or otherwise, she can have that model discard a card to summon a drudge. Now, drudges are pretty crappy, but as long as the drudge is alive, the scheme marker that it was dropped in base contact with can't be removed. And when the drudge moves, it can bring the scheme marker with it. So she has basically an endless supply of, flunkies, goons, if you will, to go out and do her bidding. And she can draw line of sight through these goons with her hidden rifleman attack, which can do damage and also inflict conditions.
Yep. She also can exert quite a bit of control over the battlefield with her various abilities. And she's, again, one of only 2 models in the game with the Unseen Manipulator ability, reducing your opponent's maximum hand size by 1.
That is just mean.
Yeah, absolutely
Having
filthy.
A 5-card hand. Some crews are just really... Imagine doing that into Molly.
Yeah.
That's pretty rough. Yeah. But she has some other interesting abilities. She can lock down a scheme marker so that models can't take attack actions near it. Mostly she wants to play a little bit farther back from the front and use her manipulating and control abilities to move her crew around and keep the enemy from doing anything.
Yeah, and she also has an extremely efficient obey style action, only requiring a 5 to go off. Now, it can only target friendly syndicate, but they can just simply take any non-bonus action for a 5 with no suit requirement. That's pretty powerful.
It is pretty strong. And, of course, she still's got some of that hazardous synergy.
Sure
So
is.
I think Anya's a really cool model, cool keyword. One interesting thing about the syndicate keyword, kind of fitting the bill of them being, mercenaries who are kind of fighting for money, is there's only one syndicate model in the game that is a pure Explorer Society syndicate model. Everything else is either dual keyword or is in another faction.
Yeah, interestingly enough, the Outcast starter box, which came out fairly recently, has 4 Outcast models, but they're all syndicate.
Very, very cool. And they have a lot of cool synergy with her as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's Anya.
Next up, we've got Cornelius Basse.
Bass. We mentioned him in the guild section.
We did. He's probably one of the models that's about as close to a good guy as you can get in Malifaux, too. He's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think Bass is pretty much the only Explorer Society person who's actually good. So Bass was a lawman in Oklahoma, and he had this beautiful daughter, Bernadette. Bernadette was raised to know right from wrong, but she was also pretty hot-tempered. And so when a corrupt judge's son started some nefarious business, she stabbed him to death. And unfortunately, that condemned Bass and his daughter to being hunted and eventually killed. So they fled to Malifaux. And in Malifaux's side, the guild have taken them under their protection, and the society have as well. And so they act as sheriffs on the frontier. And that's their keyword, frontier.
Yeah, their keyword abilities are pretty unique. One of them, Home on the Range, states that for every model with this ability, you can increase the size of your deployment zone by +1 inch. So if you take an all Frontier crew with 8 or 9 models with that ability, you can be deploying basically on the center line if you need to.
Yeah, and your opponent's still in their deployment zone, which is pretty strong.
Yeah, you do have to be a little careful because that ability, if not utilized correctly, can tend to cause you to overextend your crew and put them in harm's way from turn 1. But when utilized well, you can really do a good job of penning your opponent into their deployment zone and giving them things to worry about right from the beginning of the game.
And Bass is also very, very good at handling the rough terrain of the wild. So his crew can all kick up dust, which creates these little dust cloud markers, which are severe and concealing. And he also has a variety of fun interactions with terrain. And I would especially point to his attack. Was it Among the Willows? No, Caught in Quicksand. Among the Willows is the trigger. Caught in Quicksand ignores concealment and just does some damage. But if the enemy is in severe terrain, you get to place it anywhere within 1 inch of that terrain. And some pieces of terrain are very large.
Yeah. If you're playing with a forest that covers a quarter of one table edge, you can really, really misposition your opponent's models and cause them a lot of problems.
And that Among the Willows trigger that I talked about, it turns that whole piece of terrain hazardous until the end of the turn, which is really good.
Yep, pretty nasty. His whole crew also ignores severe terrain, and then with it, when they're in or within 1 inch of severe or impassable terrain, they gain cover, which means that terrain can even be behind them. So there can be no sight lines blocked between the model targeting them and them. As long as they're within 1 inch of that terrain, they're still going to get cover, which is pretty strong.
Yeah, so the Frontier crew is mostly about shooting things, and Bass himself has a very powerful shotgun attack. But he's also got a really cool title form.
He sure does.
Cornelius Basse, Badlands Sheriff.
Yep.
So the Badlands Sheriff, first of all, he has an aura around himself where friendly models ignore concealment in that aura.
Yes.
And that is huge for the crew because they kick up these dust clouds, but then they don't get to ignore them for concealment, which is kind of a nombo.
Yeah, he also has a very powerful front of card ability with a whopping 10-inch aura that he increases the TN of any enemy model's abilities by +2. So there are already a lot of abilities out there that are fairly high TNs requiring 8s to go off, bumping those up to 10s can be crippling for some crews.
And for summoners especially, whose TNs tend to be both high and flexible, increasing it by 2 not only makes their action harder to succeed at, it actually just limits what they can summon.
Yeah, it can lock out some of their top tier summons that would normally require a 12 or a 13. They just simply can't summon them anymore.
And now this Basse also has a very cool melee attack, Shackles, that not only targets movement, but it can, in addition to doing damage, slow, stagger, or stun an enemy. And you get to pick which one, so you can inflict some of the game's most debilitating conditions. There's also some great synergy with his challenge action, because he has a crow trigger on that action to pulse out staggered in an unresistible way. And once the enemy is staggered, his melee attack is effectively stat 8 against their movement, which means it's almost always going to hit, and then you slow them, and you stun them, and you basically make it impossible for them to do anything.
Yep. Another really cool thing about Badlands Sheriff is that he brings to the keyword marker removal, which, as we know in this version of Malifaux, can be pretty powerful against certain crews. His only tactical action allows him to target any marker. He can push that marker, and then any models pushed through, you can end a chosen condition on all of those models. And if he hits his trigger, he also removes all other markers that were moved through during this action.
So this new Basse is very strong. He controls the table well. He has a really cool ability to hand out debilitating conditions, and he just buffs his own crew in a lot of little ways and debuffs the enemy in little ways that add up to a really powerful master.
Yeah, definitely. He's very, very cool. I'm looking forward to getting him on the table.
Oh, yeah. Who are we going to be talking about next?
We're talking about my favorite master in the faction, English Ivan.
Oh, yeah. So Ivan is an old character. He goes all the way back to first edition. The only things we know about him for sure is that he's not English and his name's not Ivan. He's the leader of the DUA, the Department of Ungentlemanly Affairs, which makes him basically a spy chief. At different times, he's worked for the Arcanists. He's worked for the Explorer Society. Mostly he works for himself. See, Ivan is a little bit more than just a spy. On a mission for the Explorer Society, he retrieved a shadowy artifact that banished him into a realm of shadow, where his spirit was torn apart by horrible shadow monsters. Now, the DUA was able to recover that and basically stitch him back together spiritually, and develop some shadow technology, which allowed him to be both protected from the shadow realm and able to control it. Which means, in addition to DUA, his second keyword is Umbra, which reflects creeping, dreadful shadow monsters from this dark dimension, including his own shadow, Mr. Mordrake, who is his totem.
Yeah, this crew, pound for pound, probably has the coolest aesthetic of any crew in Malifaux, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's steampunk spies and shadow ghosts.
Yeah, for real. Think Dark City. Very, very cool stuff.
So Ivan at launch was broken.
Yeah, he was a little problematic.
His big ability is that he ignores concealment and in fact treats it as a benefit. Concealment, distracted, and friendly fire are all positives instead of negatives for him. So he would be making many attacks at multiple positive twists because you could both shoot through concealment and make him distracted. And then when you did that, you could turn one of those positive twists into a suit to allow him to automatically build in his crow triggers. And that's important because one of his crow triggers lets him summon a shadow metal. It's a really cool kind of lore, alliance with mechanics that the shadow minion you summon is based on the willpower of the target of your attack. The stronger their willpower, the more powerful the shadow you can pull. You're kind of cutting their shadow away from them and turning it into a shadow monster. So this is a very strong ability. It was very accurate. It did damage, and it summoned a very powerful minion.
Yeah, they toned him down a little bit in a couple of ways so that he's much more fair than he used to be. I still think he's a very powerful master, and I think that the community at large is kind of sleeping on him right now. He has that kind of post-nerf syndrome where people just don't think he's worth playing. I disagree.
Yeah, people definitely overcorrect. Ivan's very strong, though. Yeah. He's not quite as strong as he used to be, but he has some really cool movement shenanigans because, like much of his crew, he can jump around between pieces of concealing terrain. His signature mechanic are shadow markers, which various models in his crew, including himself, can drop either as triggers or just simply as part of the resolution of an ability. Shadow markers provide concealment. You can also jump to them, like I said. And Ivan can actually remove shadow markers, either to turn them into scheme markers or to simply no-sell an attack. That's really strong. If you can build a little forest of shadow markers around him, he's almost impossible to remove.
Yeah, you definitely need a plan if you're going to play into him. You can't just kind of play your own game and expect to win. It's going to be tough if you choose to do so.
So most of Ivan's damage output comes from his attack that, as we said, ignores concealment and can possibly summon. Beyond that, he's mostly just teleporting around. He can move his targets around a little bit, moving friendly shadows around and healing them. And his crew also has a variety of really cool shadow marker synergies. But his title version is very interesting and very unique.
Yeah. English Ivan, double agent, kind of turns the way that you play Ivan on his head. He is no longer a direct summoner. Now, by direct summoner, I mean that he can't summon with any of his actions. His unique mechanic is that he's got 3 different secret plan upgrades. And when the game starts, you select 2 of those upgrades and put them face down underneath Ivan. And then during the start phase of any turn, you can reveal one of those upgrades for an effect. You can summon a Deva in base contact with an enemy model. You can force an enemy model to take an action that can't be resisted by them and they get positive flips during. Or you can even create explosions based around shadow markers across the table. Some of them can have some pretty powerful effects.
And you can take the same one twice. So if
sure
you want, you can summon 2 Devas. What I think is really fun is if your opponent's taking a rider, you take the obey, and then in the start phase, after they get their fate tokens, but before they get a chance to spend them, you obey them and cash in all their fate tokens.
Yep.
It's really good.
Yep, pretty powerful stuff. The other thing that he does is he's a master that really focuses on utilizing Distracted by easily stacking it up on your opponent's models. He actually has a 1-inch hazardous aura around himself that instead of dealing damage, puts out Distracted on the enemy model. So it can be pretty difficult to assault him in melee.
If you charge him,
Yep.
at the end of your charge movement before you attack, you get distracted.
Yep, and then once the attack resolves, you're going to get another Distracted. So it makes it pretty tough to try and figure out how you're going to tackle him. He also has some other really cool abilities that allow you to move around your models, swap places between enemy models and your model. He can also even swap places with Mordrake, very similarly to how Seamus swaps place with his copycat killer.
I will say that action being on Ivan rather than on the totem does make it a little bit worse than the copycat killer's ability because you're cashing in a master AP to do it. But he is pretty cool. He's got a very strong tactical action, stick to the plan, his bonus action, which pretty much just lets another DUA model take a bonus action. That's pretty cool because there are very few action-generating actions that allow the target to take a bonus action, and many bonus actions are balanced around being once per activation.
Right. So in particular with Gibson, this allows you to utilize Gibson during his activation to drop a shadow marker, and then during Ivan's activation, he can cause Gibson to take his bonus action once again, dropping another shadow marker and creating a penumbral bridge between the two. Normally, it would be impossible to do that with Gibson in one turn.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool play to him. Now, I do think he's kind of struggling to find exactly what he's trying to do. His damage is a bit low, and his crew's damage is not very high either, especially with the nerf to Brock Inspectors. But he does a lot of movement and displacing abilities, which means in the right pool, he can be very frustrating to pin down.
Yeah, he's a master that really thrives on denying your opponent's ability to score while enabling your own crew, which, frankly, this keyword can be a little on the slow side to better get into position to threaten your opponent or to score their own points.
Yeah, so that's Ivan. So who are we going to be talking about next?
We're going to be talking about Jedza.
Do you mean Jedza? Jedza, whose name means hag in Polish, is a deathless woman from Earthside. At some point in the distant past, she saw something. It's unclear exactly what curse afflicted her. This is part of her backstory that hasn't been revealed yet. But whatever it was made her not only unable to die, but she spread her inability to die to everything near her. So in the intervening centuries, her body is basically rotted away. If you look very closely at her art, she's a skeleton, although she wraps herself in bandages Invisible Man style to not be scary. And she's developed followers who follow her and basically see the world at her side. She's a constant wanderer. She's always seeking, like many such afflicted individuals, to break her curse. And so mostly what she does is keep things alive. Whenever a model that is near Jedza dies, she can spend a life token from herself to keep that model alive and heal it. And her whole crew has chronicle abilities, which are abilities that trigger when a model is healed. And when a model heals, all different types of things happen. Sometimes you'll push that model around, you can pulse damage around them, you can discard a card to draw a card. But Jedza's ability when a model heals, she actually makes it indestructible for the next incoming source of damage, which means it's so frustrating to break her bubble. And whenever a nearby model dies, she can absorb their spirit and gain a life token.
Yeah, another really cool thing that she can do is sort of counterattack against way more models and masters than you would initially think. She can actually turn your enemy's healing against them.
Yeah.
So once per activation, after an enemy model heals, it would instead take that amount of damage. That can completely shut off a bunch of things, from various demise triggers to all sorts of different abilities throughout enemy crews. And she even has a tactical action where she can heal any model, and it's unresisted. So it's not a tremendous amount of damage, but she can do unresistible damage to your opponent, which can be pretty clutch.
And enemies that are regenerating near her are actually degenerating.
Yes, definitely.
Though definitely the downside of her crew is their tendency to bubble, because all of these Chronicle abilities have a 6-inch range, and so you want to have a bunch of models in overlapping 6-inch auras. But if your opponent can't punish you for bubbling, she can do a lot.
Yeah. She also has a pretty powerful ability where she can target a terrain piece. She can only target that terrain piece once per activation, but enemy models within a 2-inch pulse of it has to take a TN13 move duel, or they have to suffer effects based on the different terrain types that piece has. And if a terrain piece is concealing and hazardous and severe, they're going to suffer all 3 of those different negative effects, being distracted, you resolve the hazardous effect, and the enemy model gains staggered.
She also has a lot of terrain synergy in her crew. All Seeker models are unimpeded, and the Grave Goo, when it's in a piece of terrain, it makes that entire piece of terrain hazardous, poison, and damage 1.
Yeah,
which
nasty.
Is really strong. You put that in severe concealing terrain like a forest, and now it's pulsing out damage 1, poison, distracted, and staggered.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, moving on to her title, Jedza Everlasting. She's decided to become a little bit more aggressive with her powers. This version of Jedza has an attack, Death Touch, which does 2, 3, 4 irreducible damage. And it has a built-in trigger that lets her cash in life tokens for extra damage to a maximum of 2, which means she can do 4, 5, 6 irreducible damage with her melee attack. That's a ton of damage.
Yeah.
To help her out with that, she has Life Leech, which means any nearby model activating takes a point of damage and heals her for 1. And whenever a nearby model, including herself, with full health would heal, she gains a life token. So you can really stack up those life tokens. You can only have 3 at a time, but she has various different ways to heal herself, including by killing someone with Death Touch and by a Life Leech. So she can really keep herself topped off on life tokens very easily. I was surprised at how easily I was able to keep myself full when I played her. And she can, of course, drop these little geode terrain markers around as shockwaves, push them around, and make attacks through them. So it's very hard to hide from the Death Touch. Wherever you go on the board, she'll just drop a geode, push it over next to you, and slap you to death.
Yep, and she actually has the option of, instead of dropping geode markers... Go ahead. So another cool thing about that ability is, with a suit, if she gets a crow, she can discard a life token, and then instead of dropping a geode marker, she can actually summon a Moor Wraith, which is pretty neat. Moor Wraiths have some pretty unique abilities that play very well with Jedza herself.
Yeah, so I really like this version of Jedza. I've played with her a bit, and I think she's really powerful, and her combo of creating shockwaves, pushing them into you, and then slapping you through them is very, very strong.
Yeah, and just from a lore standpoint, she's a very interesting character. There are some sort of links between her and Zoraida that are hinted at in the lore, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about that as we go.
All right, so who are we looking at next?
We've got Lord Cooper.
Lord Cooper, actually the founder of the Explorer Society. Lord Cooper is kind of the most archetypical, like, bored rich jerk imaginable. He was a hunter who tested himself against pretty much every earth animal he could and beat them all with his gun. So he decided to come to Malifaux looking for a greater challenge. Now, Marcus was not a fan of this. And so when Lord Cooper arranged to hunt for a Slate Ridge Mauler with a new rifle he had been gifted, Marcus sabotaged the rifle, and Cooper was badly mauled within an inch of his life. He was rebuilt with mechanical prosthetics, and so now he's more machine than man. And using his mechanical arms and legs, he's able to fire a gigantic 950 Nitro Express rifle, which is actually a real caliber, by the way. But yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, so much so is he more machine than man that he actually has the construct tag instead of the living tag.
So Cooper is all about the gun.
Yep.
Everything in your crew is about setting up shots with Cooper's giant frickin' rifle. It's very powerful. It's a 3.57 that blasts right through cover, and he has the ability, common to his whole crew, Predatory Instinct, which lets him take a minus twist on his attack flip to get a plus twist on damage, or vice versa. The reason this is very strong is that you can focus, you can take a shot with a minus twist to the hit and a plus twist to damage, canceling out your focus, but giving you 2 positive twists on damage, which basically guarantees you can get to a straight flip for damage and cheat in a severe for that massive 7 damage. And he also has a trigger that lets him ignore hard to kill. So he can just basically target things that have 7 or less health and just blow them away. And there's very little your opponent can do about it. He's a range 14. Now, Cooper, he has some weaknesses. He cannot fire while he's engaged, and he can't disengage. He can't take the action. So you have to rely on other models in his crew, like his dog, Uller, to pull him out of melee. The other weakness is that gun is a very slow reload, so he can only take 1 shot per activation. He has a bonus action, which lets him take a second shot, but in order to activate that, he must have focus on him and remove the focus to take the shot. So you need to have at least 2 stacked focus on him at the start of his activation if you want your first shot to be focused, and your second shot is not going to be focused.
Yeah, he's a master that really kind of warps the battlefield and forces your opponent to play around the fact that he's got this massive 14-inch gun with a top-end 7 damage that can ignore hard-to-kill and demise abilities. That's something that can really force your opponent to waste AP trying to stay out of range of his action. And actually, just by having that threat on the table can really force some inefficiency on your opponent's entire crew. Yeah,
it's hard to justify hiring enforcers with 7 health or less into Cooper. With henchmen, you can stone and basically stay safe, but if you're going to hire someone like Bo Fishbacher, who's great, Cooper's just going to one-shot him. So don't do that.
Yeah, you really have to be careful about it.
His title version, Lord Cooper Huntmaster, is actually, I think, a more powerful master because he's a little bit less one-dimensional. Now, this version of Cooper's put away his rifle for a bow because he's decided to hunt Marcus himself in revenge. And in order to get this done, he has decided to travel light and travel mostly with beasts rather than with humans because it's harder for Marcus to sense them.
Yeah, one of the really cool things that he has on his card is anytime that a friendly model takes an action outside of its activation, it gets a +1 to the duel, if there is a duel that's going to happen. Things like this that can mess with the math of the game can really affect your opponent's ability to cheat, and it can turn models that have maybe a stat 5 or a stat 6 into a 6 or 7, really increasing the value of those actions and being able to ensure that you actually hit when you need to.
And to ensure that he's going to get these hits, he has the ability Scent of Blood. Whenever he damages an enemy, no matter how he damages them, a friendly beast can discard a card to take an attack at that enemy. Now, that attack gets a minus twist to its damage flip, so it'll usually be weak damage, but guess what? The Malifaux Rex has a weak 3, so very, very strong.
Yeah, and there are some pretty powerful beasts, as Sam just alluded to, in Explorer Society. Between the Malifaux Rex, the other models in his crew, and then the Damned, he has some pretty nasty beasts that he can bring to battle with him.
He can even hire a Sandworm, which is pretty cool. Now, this version of Cooper also can toss pit traps, much like Ma Tucket, making them hazardous, severe, and injured. Very powerful hazardous effect. And his bow is pretty good. It ignores friendly fire, so you want it to ignore friendly fire because you want to attack enemies that are already engaged by your beast so they can trigger Scent of Blood. And if you hit an enemy with this bow, they have to discard a card or gain adversary beast. And if they're not willing to pitch the cards, they are going to be in a lot of trouble as all of your beasts get a plus twist on all of their attacks against them.
Another cool thing about this particular ability is if you get adversary beast on an enemy model and then you hit them again with the bow, they have to discard a card. They don't have the option of gaining adversary beast again.
Yeah, in Malifaux, if you're given the choice to do one of 2 things and you can't do one of those things because circumstances, you have to do the other one, which comes up a bit. So I really, really like this Cooper. He's also got stealth, which means he can actually kind of play pretty aggressively because your opponent really needs to get close to him to fight him, and he can scatter pit traps around to make that harder. He can have beasts in front of him to make that harder. He's a lot less scared of being engaged than his original version was.
Yeah, for sure. Very, very cool master, and one that I'm very much looking forward to play once that box comes out.
All right, so who's next?
Next, I think, is one of your favorite masters, Sam, Maxine Agassiz.
Yes, we're going to be talking about my wife, Maxine. Maxine is the captain of the EVS Superior, Expedition Vessel Superior. By the way, she's based on Alexander Agassiz, who was a copper mining baron of the 19th century United States who built a gigantic diesel engine for one of his mines called the Superior. And now you know. Anyways, Maxine is a scientist, and she is obsessed with learning more about Malifaux. So even though she's a bit unscrupulous, her motives are pure, at least. And her crew's signature ability is Reconfigure. Every model in her crew has a Reconfigure suit. And if you cheat a card from your hand that matches your Reconfigure suit, whatever that card's value was, if it was less than a 9, you get to treat it as a 9. And if Maxine is around and you cheat with a card matching your Reconfigure suit, you get to draw a card. So she makes hands full of crappy cards into hands full of not bad cards. Now, 9 isn't going to ensure a hit, but especially if you're draining your opponent's hand, cheating a 9 is usually enough to hit. And because she has so much card draw and card velocity, she can throw away crappy cards, forcing your opponent to cheat something out of their hand or take the hit. And then she can cycle them and keep her hand full. She's got a lot of really, really cool tech.
Another really unique crew ability in her keyword is Deep Discovery. Now, once per activation, when this model would cheat a card, it can instead discard a card to cheat the top card from your opponent's discard pile.
And that's really, really strong. Because if your opponent gets like a good flip and, flips a 13, the next attack they make against you or the next attack you make against them, you're going to have a 13.
Yeah.
It's really strong.
It's something that really forces your opponent to think about what they're doing and making sure that they don't put cards in their discard pile, intentionally that would then benefit the Maxine player on the next action.
And so Max has a couple of attacks, a melee attack and a ranged attack, that are both reasonable and have reasonable triggers. But I think what people are really interested in is her impromptu invention rule, the same as Mei Fang 2's rule. This rule allows her, it's an attack, it ignores concealment, and it allows her to inflict any condition she wants on her target. Enemy model, make him stunned, make him slow. Friendly model, make him fast, give him focus. And she has 2 triggers on this. One lets her spread it around to another nearby model, potentially slowing or stunning 2 enemy models or giving 2 friendly models fast with a single AP is incredible efficiency. The other one is she just gets to stack the ability twice, so she could put 2 focus out with a single AP. Impromptu Invention is very cool and incredibly flexible. You can do almost anything you can imagine with it. It's an ability that really rewards creative thinking.
Yeah, and her primary attack is one that, while not incredibly powerful, can have some pretty significant effects. So one of her front of card abilities is at the start of her activation, she declares, or is it the start of the turn?
Start of the turn.
Start of the turn. There we go. At the start of the turn, she declares a suit. And then there are a variety of abilities on her card that take into account X, meaning the chosen suit. Her primary attack, which targets willpower, only does 2/3/5 damage, but if you hit an opposing model with it, they then have to discard cards from the top of their fate tech until they discard a card of the matching suit. So it's relatively random, but it's one that can have a pretty significant effect.
She also has a couple of triggers that are on her X suit, so you can look at your hand at the start of the turn and see what you kind of have an embarrassment of in terms of suits in hand that you can't use elsewhere, and really adapt on the fly. So Max is really flexible like that.
Yeah, she's definitely a master that you need to have a very firm grip of how to play. And there's sort of a lot of note-taking and record-keeping involved in playing her. But if you can unlock her, she can do some pretty impressive stuff.
But not as impressive as her title, Maxine Agassiz Monomaniacal. She is, in the pursuit of science, she has read the Flamme, which is basically the Necronomicon. And it left her a little bit warped.
Yeah, it sure did. To take a phrase from Steam-Powered Scoundrels, they refer to her as Tentacle Grandma.
Yes.
So I'm totally down with.
Oh, yeah. So this version of Maxine has the signature ability Breach Burnt. Whenever a friendly EVS model anywhere in play either discards a card from its deck or its hand, or cheats fate with a card matching its Reconfigure ability, it can have a friendly EVS model within 6 inches of itself heal 1. This doesn't seem like a lot, but it's an outrageous amount of healing. The first game I played with Maxine, I did 9 points of healing in a single activation, which was extremely demoralizing for poor Doug.
Yeah, it's one of those abilities that you can't necessarily rely on it to heal a ton, but you can pretty reliably get at least 1 to 3 healing out of her every activation. And sometimes you spike up to those 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah.
So this Maxine has decided to focus on tomes rather than being spread across the suits. But to help her with that, she's got Harness Leyline, which means when she's on the center line, all of her non-melee actions get +2 and a tome to their stat, which makes her actions incredibly strong and reliable, and all of her triggers are built in.
Yeah, and at only 9 wounds and no other defensive abilities to speak of, you would normally consider her to be a fairly fragile master. But she actually has Demise Revivify, which is only once per game, but once she's killed, you can place her anywhere on the center line so that she can then take advantage of that Harness the Ley line and then heal 4. And with all the built-in healing on her card, as soon as she activates, there's a good likelihood that she's going to be right back up to full.
Oh, yeah. And so her, honestly, what you're here for is her attack. Etheric Tear. She opens a portal, a tentacle comes out and slaps you. It is a range 2 attack against willpower, which is very rare. Yeah. It does 2, 3, 5 damage, but automatically inflicts injured, and it has 3 great triggers. Yeah. She also has the ability with her bonus action Converging Ley Lines to drop a shockwave marker and then teleport any model within 2 inches of that marker that fails a TN14 willpower duel anywhere within 2 inches of the marker, which is effectively a giant AoE leap. Yeah. And to help her out with that, friendly EVS models can choose to fail the duel and just teleport through.
Yeah, so for that turn 1, she can really accelerate the entire crew. And especially if you're playing in a game where there's going to be a big scrum in the middle, she can just do terrifying things to your opponent, forcing them into really bad positions and getting her models out of danger or getting them into advantageous positions to score or deny. Very powerful ability. She
also has Calculate the Possibilities, which lets her discard 10 cards off the top of her deck, which could trigger Breach Burned up to 10 times, +1 for cheating if you cheat a tome in. So that's a lot of healing. And you pick 3 cards in your discard pile and shuffle them back into your deck and then draw a card. So not only does it draw you a card, which is always good, it really fixes your draws. There's a lot of times when I will discard 10 cards and really only at that point have, 20 cards left in my deck because I've been flipping a lot. And then I shuffle 3 Severes into that deck. That's actually affecting your probability for the rest of the turn.
Yeah, for sure. And she actually has the Master Plan trigger on a tome, conveniently enough, where for every tome that was shuffled into the Fate deck, you can choose an enemy model within 6 inches and they have to discard a card or gain stunned.
Yeah, and something that really helps with this action and Converging Ley Lines is when you're on that center line, your stat is so high, it's almost impossible for you to miss your TN. So she's very, very, very strong. She has a lot of fun just getting into the middle of the enemy's crew and tentacle slapping them around. And I've really had a lot of fun playing her.
Yeah, she's a fantastic master and definitely a force to be reckoned with on the table.
All right. And who's next?
We've got Nexus.
Nexus. So Nexus is the least human member of the Explorer Society, which is really saying a lot after you've seen Cooper. Nexus was originally a artificial being created by Titania to spy. And Nexus was trapped in a prison by Titania because it committed the cardinal sin of turning on its master. Because you see, the way Nexus spies, it is a living hive mind of parasites. And anything that it infects with its parasites, it can see out of that creature's eyes and ears. Now, Nexus is actually the name of the host. The parasite is the Cadmus parasite. And that's Nexus's keyword, Cadmus. The Cadmus keyword consists of creatures that have been infected by these mites and mutated out of control. And so that includes eyes and ears, which are regular Malifaux citizens that look normal but are being puppeteered by the swarm, all the way up to the berserker husks, which are these dreadful mutated monsters. They look kind of like the Left 4 Dead zombies. And they're just these mindless, destructive creatures that have been twisted by the swarm's power.
Yeah, one of her key abilities is the ability to put out parasite tokens on enemy models. Parasite tokens are pretty interesting because they actually allow you to treat enemy models with parasite tokens as being friendly Cadmus models.
During your activation.
During your activation. Which can, initially you would think, well, I mean, there's not probably a whole lot that you can do with that, but Nexus really takes advantage of that with a variety of abilities on her card.
An offer card. She comes with the ability Hive Mind, which is an upgrade that you attach at the start of the game, and that lets her do a second activation at the end of the turn. After everyone else is activated, she only has 2 AP during that activation, and the only action she can take is Will of Cadmus, which is basically an obey action that targets only friendly Cadmus models. But it has some cool triggers. It lets them, for example, ignore their insignificant ability. This is really, really strong, especially since with Siphon Power, she can build in suits, so you can get those triggers if she needs to. A lot of Malifaux is about getting that last activation so you can complete your schemes without your opponent being able to stop you, and she just always gets the last activation just for showing up. You don't have to do anything, it just happens.
Yeah, and one of the keyword abilities is called We Are Legion, which plays into the use of those parasite tokens. So during the activation phase, so not start or end phase, when this model heals or suffers damage, it can choose another friendly Cadmus model within 4 inches, not already chosen for this ability, this activation, to heal or suffer 1 damage as before. And if it does so, reduce the amount that this model heals or suffers damage by 1 to a minimum of 0.
So this used to be really nasty because when your opponent hit you, you could just bounce the damage back on them.
Yep.
You can't do that anymore. Nexus has really been hit pretty hard with the nerf bat, but you can still share damage around among your own crew. And if you happen to take damage during a friendly activation, you can just pawn it off on an enemy model.
Yeah, an excellent use for that Siphon Power ability, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So I really do like Nexus a lot. I think this Nexus has suffered quite a bit from the nerf, though. She's lost a lot of her mojo. But Nexus 2, very cool.
Yeah, Nexus 2, one of many, is actually not 1 model, but 3.
See, with the advent of the Burning Man, Nexus's parasite swarm was dying from overexposure to Burning Man energy. And so in order to preserve their consciousness, they split between multiple hosts. So Nexus, one of many, or the Nexus kids, as people call it, because it's 3 child-looking figures, although they're all pretty bug-looking. So it's unclear if they were actually human at any point. The Nexus kids are 3 masters. You get 3 masters worth of activation, and each one gets 3 AP. And these guys are great. They have not very damaging attacks, but they have a little surprisingly high damage output with their Drain Life attack.
Yeah, for sure.
They can also spread parasite tokens, just as before. This time, though, when an enemy has a parasite token, you can discard that parasite token off the enemy to reduce their final duel total by 2 after they cheat.
Yeah, or choose not to do so. So it's one that you can really abuse to force your opponent to miss TNs when they forget that they have parasite tokens on their models and choose not to cheat in a high enough card. You can almost guarantee your ability to get, powerful abilities through on them. And then also when they put parasite tokens on enemy models, once per activation, they can cause that enemy model to suffer a damage or cause a friendly Cadmus model to heal 1. So pretty powerful.
I think it's both.
Is it both?
I'm pretty sure it's both.
Fair enough. And to your point, with their Drain Life ability, it's only a 2, 3, 4 damage track, but they've got the suit built in for a pretty unique trigger called Join Us.
Yeah, that both gives them a parasite token, so it's an extra point of damage, and it means if that model dies before the end phase, you summon an Eyes and Ears, pops out of the corpse.
Yeah, so while these models on their face are relatively fragile, they can use this Drain Life ability while they're in melee. So if your enemy throws a beater in their face to try and kill them, they hit with that Drain Life, they heal 1, they trigger their front of card ability to deal an additional damage and heal an additional 1, and they put their opponent under threat of summoning one of your models if you manage to kill them that turn. They can put out a surprising amount of damage, and they can stay up a lot longer than you might think.
Yeah, especially with 3 AP each. They also have all kinds of fun manipulative Nexus abilities with playthings, pushing friendly models nearby. Only a 2-inch push, but it's an AoE 2-inch push, so you can get a lot of movement. And Will of the Many is basically an obey targeting friendly Cadmus models. It's general actions only, but they ignore the engagement range of enemies with a parasite token, so you can interact while engaged.
Yep, and it only takes a 4 to go off. It's got a TN of 10 with a stat of 6. And if you hit the ram trigger, your model can actually ignore its insignificant ability if it has one, which is pretty powerful.
There's a lot of insignificant models in Cadmus. So
yeah, in particular, their totems.
Yeah, the totems.
The totems being insignificant and fairly difficult to kill, tending to be in your opponent's face. allowing them to ignore, and their melee attack actually just puts a parasite token on the enemy model. So you can put them in a position where they're engaged with an enemy, can ignore that enemy for the purposes of the interact, and then use that action even though they're insignificant. That opens up a ton of different scheme and strategy options.
Yes, it's very, very hard to avoid the Nexus kids scheming on you. You really have to kill their crew, and it's surprisingly durable.
Yeah, definitely. Very cool crew.
So I think that's the Explorer Society.
Yeah, it sure is.
It's a really great faction. The new faction, in 3rd edition, I think there was some skepticism, but I think it's really been kind of borne out as a good decision to add this faction.
Yeah, definitely. It's really broadened the game quite a bit. It's added a lot to the game that didn't already exist. And yeah, I've really been enjoying playing them, I gotta say.
Same. All right. So thank you very much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this video, found it very entertaining and informative. There's a link to the Goonhammer article that goes with this video in the description, and I'd also encourage you to check out the link in the description to Boring Conversation, Jesse's podcast. It's a great podcast for people who are both new to the game and experienced hands, and I think you can learn a lot.
Cool.
So until next time, we'll see you in the Danger Planet.
And keep your conversations boring, folks.
Sorry, I stayed record on the camera.
That's the thing I do. When people move, I install bidets in their houses.
Classic Brandon.
Classic Brandon.
Of all the things that you can do to
Yeah, I purchased the bidets too. I'm like, I'll buy you a bidet and install it.
It's like a whole one-stop
That's
thing.
part of the package.
I might...
He keeps breaking them. I break them, I just don't... Yeah. It's like version 3 since you've known me. Yeah. People spill beer in them and shit. Yeah.
Well...
It's fine. It happens when you party naked. It's fine.
No, it doesn't.
That's Calvin Hobbes' quote, by the way. Volume on this is uncomfortable.
But do it without the really large,
Jesus
loud
Christ.
porn noises that you're gonna...
I was going to put it over here.
Okay. I mean, keep in
I
mind...
have never seen a Bluetooth speaker that fucking big.
Yeah, I've listened to this mostly
It's like
on
Ghetto
buses.
Blaster size.
It is, yes.
It's
and there's
shaped-
also subwoofers built into each side. This is
there's
a
an
giant exclamation mark on the subwoofer, and it's in between the two of you, and you can't tell what this is.
It looked like the Danger Planet has a quest for you.
Yeah, it looks...
And then if we don't use that segment, then everybody will wonder why there was a giant Bluetooth speaker and suddenly was not.
And we won't tell them.
I'm telling you. Because I said the words, I have to have a business meeting, and he knows I have like a million businesses. He's like, you're having a business meeting right now? And Brendan's like, no, he just says that when he's doing drugs.
Do you mean Jedza?
It's playing through your phone.
I know.
I also do say that when I'm having a business meeting too.
Yeah, that's true.
Because a business meeting is also a business meeting.
It is actually that.
It's a form of business meeting.
All right, I'm
For
kidding
sure.
right
Okay.
now.